You are listening to an American Free Press podcast.
Joining me on the line is Lorina Potter, the Utah State Representative for the organization Restore the Fourth. Lorina, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lorina, I saw an article online just a few days ago. Anti-NSA group adopts highway to get close to Utah data center. Restore the Fourth Utah will carry picket signs as it picks up litter. I want to get into that in detail. Very clever. I want to get into that in great detail in a moment. But before we do, for the benefit of the listeners, can you give them a little bit of background about who you are and also about Restore the Fourth?
Well, I am just a mother. I used to be a housewife. Now I'm a full-time employee. I have a bachelor's degree. I have always been involved kind of politically and very passionate about my ideas. I work on computers and I work in the IT field. And so I've been doing that since about 2001. And during that time, I have, had a feeling that, there were people watching us and that there were things going on. But obviously those things were never substantiated until recently. I was called a conspiracy theorist or a tin hat wearer. But I've tried, to get information out, such as, in 2008, Comcast admitted that they had cameras and microphones in their DVRs, and they were reserving them for future use for consumer experience. And things like that just, really struck me as off, in our society, things like that just when they strike you as off, you need to kind of consider them. And so when these revelations came out this year from the leaks about the NSA, they really struck me that this was something I needed to get involved in. And Restore the Fourth has then come up through the same, revelations and has created a nationwide movement to try to reverse the encroachments and the absolute violations of our Fourth Amendment rights. And it's been an awesome group to work with. We've got some awesome people and we're nonpartisan. And so it's awesome to be able to have all sorts of different ideas, different inputs from different political parties, whether it's liberal, independent, conservative, and be able to come together civilly and express ideas and opinions. Basically, I just come from a background where I really honor the Constitution. I value the Constitution. My family settled, in the United States back to Plymouth Rock. I have other family members who actually settled here in Utah. My third great grandfather was one of the people in the second pilgrimage in to this valley, and he helped settle Salt Lake. Then he helped settle up in Logan, which is north of Salt Lake, and then he traveled south and helped settle in South Utah. It was a very rough life here. It's very pioneer, and there's a lot of different elements that come into play here. We have this huge lake, but it's salt, so you can't use it for irrigation and drinking, and so they had a lot of challenges that they overcame. And so I come from a family of very hard workers, people who are very passionate and aren't apt to shirk. So when this opportunity came along to be represented for Restore the Fourth, I jumped on it and have been working diligent every day and trying to bring awareness to what the government is doing to its citizens.
Yeah, that's great that you're doing that. How long has Restore the Fourth been around?
It started this year, about May or June. I don't know the exact date. It was right within the realm and the time frame of when those leaks came out.
The website, of course, is restorethefourth.net. And I just want to read the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. And these are the exact words. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant, that's with a capital W, shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath, and that's capitalized as well, or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So that's it in its entirety. It seems pretty clear to me, although I guess the people in power have a tough time understanding this one sentence.
Well, not only is it clear, but it has a very, very clear background as to how it even came into existence.
Can you get into that?
Absolutely. Back across the pond in England, there were two men who were, I guess you would call them pamphleteers, that were spreading information about the king and the things that the king was doing that were not correct. The king was very unhappy. So he sent in his people to rifle through their homes and their workplaces, take anything they wanted. They took things that were not just the papers that they were distributing, but their books and their personal effects. Feeling this violation, each of those men filed lawsuits, and they won, proving that people have the right to speak their mind. People have the right to have their own personal effects, to have their books, to have ways of education about things in the world, that people don't have the right to control them and their thoughts and their ideas. Then when we come across to the United States and we've got the Stamp Tax Act going and people are being taxed into poverty, we have people who aren't able to provide for their families. And so there were people who stood up against it. And the people who stood up against that were targeted by these overbroad warrants that made no specification as to what they were looking for, where they could search, what they could take. But even worse, they didn't even have to have warrants because it was basically lawlessness at that point, that they could just do what they wanted because it was a tyrannical government that looked at America as a money-making machine, that they could destroy the lives of these people in trying to gain revenue. And so out of that came the Boston Tea Party, but also came out of that a lawsuit, which ultimately failed within the court system. But it was the kind of, the shot that was heard around the world for this instance, that after this lawsuit was filed on behalf of all these merchants, it was an issue that the settlers and the people living in this time were not going to accept. They were not going to accept this was okay. And they continued on. Massachusetts then passed a state constitution that completely outlawed any overbroad warrants. And it said if somebody wanted a warrant, that was fine. But it had to be specific. It had to state specifics. It had to state where they were searching, when they could search, what they could search through, what they could take. And this was then the beginning of the Fourth Amendment. And this is how it was constructed, because it had a very clear history of why it was necessary, because of tyrannical governments that overstepped the rights of the people. People have individual rights. It's not something that's instilled by government. It's instilled by God or, whatever creator or even non-creator you believe in. But this is not something the government gives you. This is something that you have.
The group began actually this year around spring or summer, and you just happened to be in Utah. And of course, the NSA's high-tech surveillance, that new surveillance facility, which I think it's still being built. Is that right?
Well, it is completely built.
Oh, it is done. Okay.
However, they have had a lot of electrical trouble from what I understand. Obviously, they have never invited me in for a tour. But from my understanding, they have had a lot of electrical troubles to the point that they're creating essentially lightning boxes and melting the computer systems, destroying millions of dollars in computers and equipment.
Taxpayer dollars.
At taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, of course. That's only taxpayer dollars. Well, it's a shame that they're having a tough time there snooping on our email and phone
Very
calls.
terrible.
Yeah, that's horrible. I mean, I hope they're listening to this now. I'm sure they are. It's very exciting, isn't it, NSA, to be hearing us discuss how you're violating the United States, isn't it? Yes.
As of this point, they haven't taken me yet, so...
And I've seen driving around these Adopt a Highway signs across the country. Who came up with the idea from Restore the Fourth?
I have to say, I actually do not recall who threw out the idea. We had our 4th of July rally, in which we tried to use, there's a vacant lot across the street from the gates of the NSA data center. If you look on, any maps such as, Google Maps or Microsoft Live Maps, you can see it's just completely empty. There's nothing there. There's no reason why we shouldn't have been able to stand there. But we did anticipate in advance that we weren't going to be able to stay long. We knew from the past actions of the NSA that we would be made to move. So we had made arrangements in advance to move to the Veterans Memorial should that occur. And no sooner did we start setting up than they came and told us we had to leave. So after this event, we got together and had kind of a roundtable where we were putting out ideas of how could we combat the barriers that we were being given and how could we do it legally, but doing it so that we could call attention as to what this building is. Most of us here didn't even know what was being built. So this idea was thrown out as a way to kind of try to bring attention to the fact that this is what's here. Each of us then was kind of delegated, or we chose what we wanted to go forward with, and this is the initiative that I wanted to move forward with.
How far away is the building from civilization?
Oh, it's in the middle of it. Right next door to it is some farmland, and just about a mile down the road is a subdivision. When you're looking at it from the highway, you can see all sorts of subdivisions, and then it sits up on a hill. So it's right in the middle of a city, right in the middle of housing.
You would think that the government would want to go outside of that area because maybe the land would be less expensive?
There's a million other places it could have been built. I don't know exactly why it was there, but I do know that there's people who are very wary of even speaking because they're literally in their backyard.
Wow, what's happened to the country? Oh boy. So let's talk about this article here. Anti-NSA group adopts highway to get closer to Utah data center. And this particular section that you adopted, how far away is that from the center?
It's right there at the NSA data center gates.
It's right at the gates, and how far of a stretch do you have?
We have 2 miles.
Oh, nice.
And I used the GIS mapping that was available through the counties to determine exactly which point to start.
Very nice. Do you buy that stretch of 2 mile stretch?
It's a voluntary effort, and obviously the DOT needs people out there. There needs to be more volunteer work where the government is concerned at cleaning up our roads because we pay for the people to be out there and doing it, and they just don't have the resources to do this. And there are a lot of people who aren't, working to keep our environment clean, and that's just a fact. And so this is a volunteer thing. When you adopt the road, it is by volunteer effort, and so there's no charges or costs associated with except for your time.
Here you've got right to the gate and 2 miles past. And this, of course, is the Utah Department of Transportation you're talking about, right?
Yes,
okay,
it is the state.
Gotcha, not the U.S. Department of Transportation. Okay, so here they have the signs up. They say, adopt a highway sponsored by Restore the Fourth, something like that.
I don't believe that they have the signs up yet. We just finished the paperwork early last week, and so I know it'll take a couple of weeks. But yes, we will have 2 signs out there that have the state adopt a highway sign, and then underneath it, it'll say our name.
Is there a possibility that it might get shot down?
I suppose there's always that possibility. There's been clarification to the laws that state that people have the right to film and, record on federal land, federal property, and the NSA violates that all the time, seizes cameras if you try to even film at the gates. They make illegal rules up all the time, and so there's always that possibility, and I believe a lot of that tactic then comes down to if you try to sue for that, who has more money and who can wait out the longest. So there's always a possibility that they can. However, they are federal government, and this program is state government.
And if they did do that, then I imagine you might bring them to court.
Absolutely. But, I'm still allowed to go out there. I'm a citizen here in Utah, and I have a civic duty to my community, and I can still go out there and clean up the road if I want to.
Now, you were interviewed in this article in the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper, or at least online. It was probably in the paper, right? And this is
It was in the paper.
Okay, great. And you said here that the group, Restore the Fourth, plans to carry picket signs as it picks up litter. Is that right?
Yes.
So would you just pick up the litter without the picket signs?
We've got to have a meeting to kind of deal with the details of the event, because obviously the most important thing is safety, period, whether it be cleaning up safely on the road or should we be met with resistance from the government, being safe there as well. So the number one most important thing in our initiative is the safety of any of the people who come out. But number 2 is making sure that we do a good job right there in front of farmland. And so that farmland also has a right to be clean. We will figure out, the exact details, like if there's going to be people who, kind of clean and then people hold signs and then swap. But, we will be figuring that out.
I don't imagine there would be much litter on that road, right?
Well, I would hope not. Utah is a wonderful state, and we have wonderful people here, and there's a real sense of community here. And I think for the most part, people do have a respect for the land here. But either way, if there is trash out there, it needs to get off the road.
Yeah, I agree. Would this primarily be for the actual employees of the NSA to see? Because who else would be going down that road?
There is quite a bit of traffic there. It's a divided highway with, I think it's about 4 lanes wide. I can't remember if there's a turn lane or not through there, but it's a major thoroughfare because it runs parallel to I-15, which is the main highway that stretches north to south in Utah. And so it's kind of like an alternative to that highway route. And so it actually does get quite a bit of traffic.
That's good. And over here it says that the agreement, I guess that's the agreement with the Utah DOT, calls for Restore the Fourth Utah to pick up garbage at least 3 times a year?
Yes, that is correct. And obviously that's a minimum, the minimum effort required. And I hope to be out there doing it a lot more often than that.
So you could actually be out there if you wanted to every day or a couple of times a week.
Absolutely. As long as I think that the main requirement is that we just plan it in advance with them. We go to their local office to pick up the vests and the trash bags and, all of the things that we need to be out there. And also, we go through safety training to make sure that our people are kept safe.
And it also says here that Restore the Fourth is in cities and states across the country.
Yes. And, we have awesome volunteers. We now have, obviously resources online to be able to communicate with each other. And we've got some amazing people coordinating. And obviously we need more volunteers across the country to start local chapters. Even here in Utah, there are some people who are up in like Logan that are quite a bit isolated from the city because it's quite a bit further north in the mountains that want to start a chapter. And we need volunteers all across the country to start chapters. This is something people are very passionate about. It doesn't matter what political background or social background you come from. This is something that people are very passionate about. They don't know how to combat it because there's a lot of fear. I mean, these are people who are hacking into your computers, quote unquote, legally, through our government. And so I think there's a bit of fear, but I think that fear can be quelled whenever there's more than one, whenever you have a community that's there to stand behind you and each other and to fight for this cause.
And of course, all anyone would have to do is go to restorethefourth.net, and right there is the local chapters tab, right?
Right. You can find your local chapters right there on the website. And they are unveiling the new domain name, which is restorethefourth.com. And that's a number 4th.
Great. And how do you folks survive? Do you get donations, or is this just completely volunteer out of your own pocket?
At this point, the main people have filed for the 501c3 status so that we can take those donations. And there are ways to do that if you go to the website. But mostly this effort is through volunteer effort. We have been discussing the possibility of doing things like selling t-shirts or bumper stickers, and the logistics of that have to kind of get hammered out. But at this point, it really is just a volunteer army.
And finally, you say here in the article that you don't object to the NSA's existence, but you want them to use the public courts, that would make sense, to apply for warrants to obtain records on specific individuals rather than using FISA, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to obtain bulk data. If they did that, would you guys close up shop?
I don't think that it would be a good idea to close up shop. I don't believe that activism can ever actually stop. There's always going to be people who are seeking power that will seek to erode and destroy our rights. I don't think that stopping your advocacy for the things you're passionate about is ever a good idea. I think a lot of the reason why we are where we are is because at some point between when there were amazing patriots that were willing to shed their blood for this country, and now people have decided that we should no longer talk about politics or religion or any of the things that are important to us. And now look, we're losing all of our rights on a daily basis. Every one of them is being trampled on, and our government is out of control. And I think is in large part because people aren't out there advocating for our country.
I agree with you 100%. Lorina Potter, the Utah State Representative for Restore the Fourth, I want to thank you so much for the time you spent explaining all this to the listeners. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's a great thing, and looking forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I was so glad to be on here.